Well, hello, everybody, and here we are again. My name is John Barnwell, and I'm here with my greatest teacher and my greatest pupil and my best friend, Douglas Gabriel, Dr. Douglas Gabriel, and we're going to continue on for the Douglas Gabriel Chronicle here that we're putting together because in my personal experience, and I've known so many people in so many walks of life, and he is by far one of the most interesting people that I've met. So, in that regard, I guess we'll just start out and try and figure out some more details regarding this interesting, knowledgeable, mysterious individual. He's still a mystery to me, by the way. Douglas Gabriel. Douglas, how are you?
I'm good, John. This conversations that we've started, interviews with an exorcist, have stirred up a lot of people, and a lot of people have contacted me, and I wanted to just say thank you to them for giving the support to say that they really appreciate this, and they think that I'm very brave to finally come out and speak the truth about all this. And as you emphasized last time we talked, really, I haven't ever told anybody about this stuff. So what we're finding out now in just the last couple days is Michael McKibben started researching this, and he actually has confirmed some of the things that Tyler had told me years ago and said, no, that's what happened. And I'm going, I don't know. So actually, this is opening up a whole new can of worms that is quite extraordinary for me. So it's a very deep and moving moment in my life to be able to say to people, yes, you need to be your own exorcist because we are so filled with evil all around that you need to find the way. And of course, some people ask, now, can you tell us exactly how you did it? So I guess they can do it. But it's a very long and complicated story. I anticipate that we'll have to have many of these podcasts so that we can cover the basis for the fact that so many people have asked me, please write down your biography. It could in some way help others. So that's the reason I'm doing this.
Yes, and that's probably as good a reason as any. I mean, if you look over, by the way, we tend to focus on Dr. Rudolf Steiner's work, as many of you that follow us know that. And so, even though he's my best friend, usually what we talk about when we're together is Rudolf Steiner's spiritual science. And so, a lot of these biographical details are new to me too. And occasionally they would pop in because there would be a context in which it would be relevant to what we were discussing at the time. But a lot of the details, I'm really excited about this, perhaps more than anybody here, to be able to hear some more of the background. And so I thought that we could look more closely at your sponsorship by Father William and get some more of the backstory regarding that before we get into some of the other facets of your unusual path of life. So if you would, please share more.
I think you guys used to call it a colorful life or a checkered past, or you always had names for it. And usually you didn't want to hear the details because who wants to hear these details? So I'm going to go into the details because who says how much longer I got on this earth? And I would like to put this down for posterity's sake. For instance, I'd like to sing the praises of Father William because now I know some things about him I never knew. And like I didn't tell you about my details of my life. He never told me the details of his life. I knew some things. And now, thanks to Michael McKibben and the miners, they have revealed amazing things. So he was not only the procurator, which basically means the person who was in charge of formation for the largest house of formation, Conception Abbey. He was then chosen to move out to Nebraska to start Mount Michael Monastery, which was for what they called minor. It's a minor monastery. So that means that they had a high school and they were trying to get young men to get interested in the priesthood. And they had then a monastery there for the first 2 years of training, and then they'd come to Conception Abbey. He was the head of that. He was also the head of Conception Abbey. He was also the chief exorcist in America. He was, I guess, a writer and highly respected. And so he's written things and he's been quite political. And we are now finding, Michael is finding, I tried to research this, I never could find it. And I didn't really know that he was my father until recently. And now it's become quite obvious. And Michael just told me that he sent a picture, a frontal picture of Father Williams, and he said, "Oh yeah, you are his son. There's no doubt whatsoever." Well, there's another story that goes along with that, and that's that my sister and others suspected that my mother was talking about a man named Bill Gray. Well, I went to search Bill Gray and couldn't find anything about him. And this is unbelievable in a small town like Springfield that a guy could disappear that was the major tech guy in town and a performer. So I don't know. That's who I believed it was for the years since my mother's passing. But now I'm 100% convinced because we have the exact timing. And so the timing of my family's relationship to St. Joseph Cathedral, St. Joseph Church in Springfield, Missouri, now absolutely coincides with the details that I know from our life and how that related to his. So I was born in Springfield, stayed there 7 years, left for 7 years and went to three different other federal penitentiaries where my father worked, and then came back for about 5 years, I think, or 4 years in high school. So here's Father William. He baptized me. Then I was gone for 7 years. And then I showed up when I was, well, actually, he baptized me. I was not really in, we didn't go to his church for 7 years. We went to another church in town. And then when I reached 14, he comes back into my life and knows all the details. Well, it's obvious. He had to have been watching us to know those details. And it seems as if we have, as the information is pouring out, and I now find out who his friends were, like Father Reedy. Well, Father Reedy was in my life up until he died not long ago. 20 years ago. But the point is that now we know exactly some details that put it on a timeline where there's no doubt in my mind. So let me explain what happened. When he wheeled into that room and called me out and claimed me for the Catholic Church because my parents had supposedly, well, they said they did, dedicated me to the church when I was born and when I was being baptized, because he was the parish priest at that time. So when he got a hold of me, he was so thrilled, and I couldn't understand why he was so, now it makes sense, why he was so incredibly happy to see me again. It's like, why? You saw me when you baptized me. Why would you be happy to see me? Why are you making such a big deal over this? And so I would push him around, and we'd go and do the rounds every day. And every day we'd go down in the psych ward. That psych ward had about 100 patients. This was a huge hospital, and that was the largest psych ward in a 3-state area. So people were sent in who were having severe psychological problems. And the Catholic Church, anytime they had someone they really believed was possessed, they'd send them there because they could be locked up, they could be controlled, they could be, there were guards, there was, lots of money, by the way. Every time Father William and I wanted to go somewhere, he just picked up the phone and said, send me around a bus. We'd go down, get on a bus that could handle wheelchairs, and we would go everywhere. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. But essentially, I was there with him and going around the hospital. And essentially, I got to see one of the greatest healers of my life. Now, that's saying a lot because I've met a lot of healers. And because he was a healer, he started taking me immediately to amazing things going on in Springfield, Missouri. Now, you might think Springfield, Missouri is, absolutely out in the sticks, and it is. And it's the closest city to Branson, if you know about the capital of country music is in Branson. But Springfield was a very small town. When I was born, it was like 90,000 people. And unfortunately, in those 90,000 people, drew in a lot of students who were Christian. Well, not unfortunately, but there are 7 Bible colleges in Springfield, Missouri. That's more than any other city in America. It is called the Buckle of the Bible Belt. And it literally was. The home of the Assembly of God Church was there, which is what started what we call the charismatic movement in the Catholic Church, the Pentecostal movement, the Spirit-filled movement. And it actually happened. The start of that happened in Springfield, Missouri. I know because I accidentally started it. I was praying in tongues in the chapel when Father William I was in there for some reason. My dad, I think, was in there again. He was in the hospital dozens of times. And so I was up there and I was praying, and I didn't know that there were a couple of the nuns, the Sisters of Mercy, up in the choir balcony, and they heard me praying in tongues, right? Which I was apt to do because Father William, every Sunday, we would go out to another church to check it out. And we went to all of the Black Southern Baptist Church called the Church of God in Christ, or the Nazarene, or there's a variety of them, these Southern Baptist churches, which found Springfield to be their home after the Church of God in Christ was founded in California, but it moved into Springfield. And then all of these churches propped up that were part of what was called the charismatic movement, and they were connected to the Assembly of God. Now, the Assembly of God, and it'll actually say in the Wikipedia that that's a bunch of white folks who tried to do what the Black folks are already doing in their Southern Baptist churches, which is be filled with the Spirit. That means speaking in tongues. That means witnessing, prophesying, healing, laying on of hands. And in these churches that Father William and I would go to, because he was in the wheelchair, we'd roll right up to the front and we got the best view of what was going on. And we saw people dancing in the Spirit, singing in the Spirit, playing music in the Spirit, being slain in the Spirit, and literally what are called holy rollers. Now, that term sounds funny, but it's literally true. When they would do the altar call, some people would get up and they would be slain in the Spirit, fall to the ground, and then roll the rest of the way up to the altar. Holy rollers. Okay, I'm not exaggerating. I went to all those churches. Of course, we were the only two white people there, but we loved it and they loved us because he was this beautiful, incredible person. He was like a saint. He radiated. He was an amazing person that way. And because he was interested in getting healed, he loved to go to these healing services, right? So we went to all of them. And then eventually, as a sideline job, because when I entered high school, I joined the Future Business Leaders of America and a bunch of other clubs. And I was, held the office of, vice president or treasurer, whatever. And I had a group called Parliamentary Procedure Team, and we won first in the nationals for FBLA. So I was I then became a paid parliamentarian, $75 an hour. Okay. I'm 14 years old. I bought a 3-piece suit, nice shoes, and I had people who could drive me there. And I would do a lot of work for the Assembly of God, U.S. headquarters. They also had their international headquarters there. They also had the college there, Evangel, Southern Baptist, Bible Baptist, all these totally religious, spirit-filled colleges and churches. So we had a slew of places to go. Well, I got known pretty well going there because when you're there and you go up to the altar call, the preacher gets all worked up giving you a sermon, then and he comes up and he waits for one of these people called a dove to come, who's sensitive, who stands behind a person they believe really needs to be healed, zapped, as we called it. Well, I became a dove because I could look at the people and see who needed to be healed and who was ready to be healed. So you go up and you put your hands on them and you start doing laying on of hands, and the minister comes up, touches their head and zaps them, and then you and whoever is near you have a person as they fall back and literally sometimes shake and go into convulsions. And then they get up and they're healed. And I saw so many healings, literally thousands of healings. Now, the problem with that is it didn't stick. So some months later, they'd be back in, you'd be doing the same thing, and they'd throw another set of crutches over the altar or in this corner where everybody would throw their wheelchairs and their crutches, and they'd come in with them and leave without them. So I saw a lot of that. But Father William was very much he was a radical Catholic. He was, in Tibetan Buddhism, they have a thing called crazy wisdom. Well, he was crazy wisdom in the Catholic Church, okay? He was so far out there with his beliefs. If it was forbidden by the Catholic Church, he did it. And he taught it to me. Like I said before, the Jesus Christ Superstar came out. It was banned by the Vatican. He got an album, played it. He memorized the whole thing. That's how he was. He has astounding musical memory. He couldn't play anymore, but he was a great musician. His voice was quavered. It was kind of strange, but he still sang a lot. So we listened to it. I'm reading along, with the thing, with the words and singing along, and he's sings it once with it, and then he had it memorized. And so when we would go off on trips, we'd sing the whole Jesus Christ Superstar opera in its entirety. And we'd turn to each other and say, well, do you want to be Jesus this time, or do you want me to be Jesus this time? And so we would do things like that. And every day, I had a job, of course. I had a lot of jobs at school. I had many, many positions I fulfilled. I was the parliamentarian of the student council. I was the elections commissioner for all elections in the high school. I was in VICA, DECA, FBLA, High Y, you name it. I was in all the groups and held high positions in them because I was like an overachiever, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, so I was involved in all of these things, and I became a parliamentarian and started working for these churches because when they would have meetings and they'd work on their bylaws or whatever, they'd have to have a parliamentarian there. Sometimes I'd sit there and do nothing and get paid $75 an hour. So I had that job. I worked at a cafeteria and other food places. And my junior and senior year, I went off to second half of my day, went to college to get a degree in computer programming. So I would leave school, go to the hospital, do mass with him, and the nuns would all come down, and we'd do mass every day. And then he and I would go do vespers, or we'd go do rounds, and then we'd come back and do vespers. But no matter what, we'd end up always going into the psych ward. So this is the kind of thing that I encountered every single day. I'd go into the psych ward, and they'd say, Father William, there's a new person here. Here's his records. And we'd read the records, and then we'd go and we'd see if we could psychically, clairvoyantly, or clairaudiently or clairsentiently get into what their problem was and see if we could help it. And we had sometimes tremendous success. But again, it might only be temporarily. But with the possessions, we were 100%. We were 10 out of 10. We always were able to help the person. Sometimes it took a while, and we had to do a lot of praying and fasting, and we had to really focus on that person, enter into why they're in that condition. Because when someone's possessed, you need to know how they got there. As I've said before, you don't get possessed unless you open that doorway yourself. And nobody kicks the door down, and there's no such thing. So when you you see the stupid movies, they're all about, getting possessed and you didn't want to be. That's not going to happen. So we'd get there and we'd find out, oh, wow, okay, this one, I'm going to have to say some very terrible things, okay? But this is part of, if you want to hear about exorcism, as we told you to begin with, if you don't, turn this off. If you do, you better be ready. So one particular case, this girl came in and she was having telekinetic stuff happen all over the place. Things would float in the room and so on and so forth. So everything had to be taken out. And then she would get crazy and wild and attack people. And she could attack them with her voice or with just energy. She would physically attack them. So she's in a straitjacket and she's in a bed and she's either a straitjacket or strapped down, and we'd go in and work on her. And things would start floating around as soon as we'd make what's called the blessed circle, and we both have to stand in it, and we'd start the rite of exorcism, and we'd do it, and she'd start going crazy and convulsing and this and that and this and that. But that isn't how it works. First, you have to become friends with them. And you're talking to this. So I'm talking to this girl. I'm saying, how did you get here? What happened? I knew her record. She had been raped from a very early age by her father. And her father beat her mother and beat her. And then the father killed the mother in front of her, and he didn't even get prosecuted for it. So the girl killed the father. All right? That's how she got possessed. Maleficat. There's names of demons, which I could tell you. There's sigils, signs for the demons that you can make in the air, so on and so forth. So if you get their name, if you get why the person allowed them to come in, and then you get the person to say they don't want them there anymore, bingo, you're done. You call out their name, you do the prayers, and all you have to do is keep doing them over and over and over again, and you'll see that the separation between the two, the demon, and in some cases, multiple demons in the person. So you start to see the separation, and then the demon gets really, really mad right before they leave. And that's when they attack the exorcist. And so that's the most critical time, is when you can start to see that the person possessed starts to come back to themselves. the demon is outside of them and there's this battle going on. And now the person sees the demon for who they are because we, the exorcist, called them into a manifestation so that if you were a clairvoyant, you could see it. So once that happened, then we would have to know where we're casting them. And that's kind of an exorcist secret. I can't tell you that. But when you cast a demon, you have to cast it into something, or else it's probably going to go into you or the very next person to you or someone outside the room, whatever. And it will roam around. As a matter of fact, these things roam around all the time. And when I was a child, I saw them. And I would see the battles of angels, hosts of angels, because unless you're seeing your own personal angel, when you see an angel, you're going to see a few angels. And so I would see this battle happening kind of above me and in the air, and these dark demons and these angels, and they get into these battles, and I would like just be completely transfixed. Well, that's exactly what happens during an exorcism. You literally have to call in whoever your favorite saint is, whoever you have to use the Holy Spirit, you have to use Christ, you have to use the Father God, the whole Trinity. You really have to bring in whatever you have as your relationship with the spiritual world and put it on the line and saying, no, you're going to leave this person because of this moral injunction. And the moral injunction is, I cast you out in the name of Jesus Christ and whatever. Okay. So that was every day, 7 days a week for the 4 years of my high school, literally starting from, I think, the first week in high school. I would do this with this priest. And then we'd also go around and see sick people. But then the people who, there's a disorder. If you don't have enough vitamin K, where you become frozen, you get frozen in a position and you can move around, you can walk, you don't talk much. And if you do, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So there were a number of these people there. And until they realized it was a vitamin K deficiency, we had a bunch of these people in the psych ward. And those were the easiest ones because I would be able to enter into their mind and say, oh, I get what you're doing. You're a businessman and you're standing at the bus with your briefcase. That's the reason you're standing exactly this way. I could look at them and kind of see, and then I'd talk to them and say, where are you? And then they tell me and they say, oh, well, the bus isn't coming today. What? The bus is not coming today? And then you'd have a conversation with them and all of a sudden they'd snap right out of it. And for a while they'd be okay without any meds, without anything. Now that wasn't a possession. That was a psychological disorder. So we dealt with them too. And that's the reason that I'm very aware, experienced with all these psychological disorders. So that was just a normal day. But when the time would come that he would get called to some place where they couldn't transport the person, and in most of these cases, it's young people, by the way. It's not old people. It's young people. Like everyone was like under age, say 25, 28, something like that. And so you get a call and we'd find out that he needed to go on Saturday to a town outside of Springfield, and we'd get in the bus and we'd go. And at first he didn't bring me in. And it took him a while to even tell me, and he never used the word exorcist for the first year and a half. We were just helping people. We were just, trying to help people get healed. But then after that, we started going out to these were terrible cases. These were way worse cases, way worse than what's on The Exorcism, the movie. So one particular case, I think we went up to Mountain View, it was, and we were driven up there by someone in a bus, and he says, you stay in the bus. I said, really? You really want that? You don't want me to come in with you? No, don't come in with me. This is a terrible case. I may need you. And if I do, because we could just talk to each other through our minds, just like I could with my mother all my life. I could just go in, look through her eyes and know what's going on in her life. But we could do that. So he says, no, if I have any trouble, I will call you, but you sit down here and you hold the light and you pray and you do what someone does who's outside of the circle. So I'm outside of the circle in this particular case, in the bus and praying, and I get a message, come quickly, emergency. So I run in, go up, it was up a few floors. Somehow I knew where it was. I don't know how I knew where it was, but I went up, I go in the room, and here's this situation. At that moment, the girl in the bed who I had known this. He had said, "Oh no, they have this phenomena that she has a comb that goes up and combs her hair." So I come into the room, and I'd been told that this girl had telekinetic phenomena. The comb would comb her hair, things would move around the room. This wasn't unusual, but she had moved the bed over and was squishing Father William's wheelchair, and literally had squished it. Now she's sitting in the bed; she's not touching the bed. So the bed moved over, and he was climbing up. He was already climbing out of the wheelchair, and he was going towards the window against his will. And this possessed demon was trying to throw him out the window. So I came in, and that was one of the first times I've ever just, had that bad of a situation. And so I came in, pulled him down in the chair, went over to the girl, and slapped her across the face as hard as I could. That you're not supposed to do that, by the way. The comb fell, the stuff in the room fell, she fell back, she sighed, and basically it was because he had not done it right. And he literally had put his life on the line because of that. And then that made me suspect things. And then after that, seldom did he ever go to a very serious case that he didn't take me along and put me in the circle and be part of the whole process.
Wow. Yeah. Well, the key to understand here, and I can thank Pastor David for reminding me of this, but the earliest Christian churches were thought of as hospitals, really. And what they did was they healed people and they cast out demons. And that's what they did. That was their job, basically. And so if this seems kind of unusual to some people, to where your denomination is really more of a social club of community, well, that's a good thing. But keep in mind that even in Islam, if they have to do an exorcism, they call a Catholic priest. And people from other religions, they know this. This is what the special dispensation of the Christian tradition is from the earliest periods. And so when you have that, then you can approach these things with understanding if you begin to include in your curriculum, so to speak, Rudolf Steiner's spiritual science, because he gives you a language in which you can come into a closer level of understanding. So then what happened next? Oh, by the way, I wanted to add something. Springfield's an interesting town in more than one dimension, by the way, because that's where Thomas Johnson, the Platonist, had his magazine where he would publish translations of the Greek Neoplatonic authors that had influenced Ralph Waldo Emerson, got Thomas Taylor's translations from Bronson Alcott, for example. Bronson Alcott was the father of Louisa May Alcott of Little Woman fame. And so this is very much a part of the fabric of American society. You have to realize that many of the people that came to America came here for the concept of religious freedom. And so we have over 35,000 denominations in the United States. I'm sure there's all these other groups that get together and they're unofficial, but there's 35,000 registered denominations. And yeah, Springfield, from what I've heard, is one of those places where you've got the greatest diverse cluster of denominations all occupying quite a small area. And so it's fascinating that kind of the hub of your development is coming out of Springfield. That's really interesting. It's because that area, they call it like the buckle of the Bible Belt, and so it's really central for American Christian culture to come to understand some of its history.
Yes, it was also the home of the Metaphysical Society, which is now all over the world. I know the guy who founded that. It was the home of the people who were kind of the leaders in the Urantia book, which actually came out of Kalamazoo, Michigan, but ended up having a headquarters there. So just about all the different groups that you can imagine end up in Springfield, Missouri. I think it's because Springfield is on a high plateau, about 1,200 feet above sea level, and underneath it, it is catacombed with caves. Fantastic Caverns is it's called, but it is extraordinarily extensive. So you're sitting on top of a limestone plateau above these caves, and I can't help but think that that had something to do with it, because not only did the Assembly of God Church get started there, they have 70 million followers, 300,000 churches throughout the world, and 6 or 7 different branches. Well, I worked with all of those branches and also the churches they came from, as well as all these other Catholic things. And essentially, my teacher, Father William, loved to take me to what are they called? Revivals. Why? Because Springfield had the biggest revivals around. Thousands of people sometimes would show up to these things, and they'd hold them in these big open areas. And who would come? Catherine Coleman. I met Catherine Coleman a number of times. She's probably considered to be the greatest healer. I think something over some millions of people claim to have been healed by her. Well, she became a fast friend of mine as I'd wheel Father William up to the front. And here she is, and she would give the most dynamic sermons. And she was just so loving and so incredible. And where is she from? Missouri. She's a Missouri girl. So she was, spoke my language. And so she'd come around every year, a few times, and do these open air revivals, and pack the place. And just I'd see so much healing. Well, Father William and I would never miss one of those. Also, Oral Roberts, the man who founded his school in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which we also went and visited. But he would come, and he too, at that time, he was a healer and he was a preacher, and he would do revivals. And same thing, tent revivals where thousands of people would come. Again, we'd be right up front. And so I got to know Oral Roberts quite well. Same thing with Billy Graham. So, and many, many others would come to Springfield, and they'd rent the auditorium there. They'd rent the playing fields, and they'd literally have thousands of people come out. And you got to see amazing healing going on. And of course, Father William was, had polio or whatever he had. He was in a wheelchair. And so we went there not only for training me, and because I was so interested. And by the way, both of us were so thrilled to study all this stuff. That's all we ever wanted from youth. The first thing I ever wanted to do was study all religions and understand all religions. And so he had that inclination too. And so we would go and we'd do all these things. And pretty soon I got known. And after a while, when I got a car, I'd just go myself sometimes. And I'd go to all these churches, meet all these ministers, and get involved. And they call this position a dove, the person who's psychic, who has the power of discernment to say, zap this person. And so I was literally there during the healings of thousands of people. I've witnessed that. And people think I'm making that up, but it's not made up at all. But at the same time, as I said, in that chapel, Father William's chapel in the top of St. John's Church, these nuns heard me praying in tongues. And they came down and said, that was the most angelic thing I've ever heard. What are you doing? What is that? So I took 3 of the head the head nun, I forget what they call her, and then 2 others who were these beautiful saint-like beings, and I would take them to these churches, right? And so I took them out there, and they got really into this. So there's a lot of Sisters of Mercy at that hospital, like 20 or 30. They started having prayer meetings and healing meetings because all these holy rollers, all these charismatic religious people always had a healing night on Wednesday. And I'd always go to the healing nights because that's, to me, was where it was really happening. So I'd take them there, and then they started speaking in tongues and praying in tongues, and then having a healing meeting on Wednesday. And pretty soon, the Pentecostal movement in the Catholic Church was founded in that chapel. Not by me. I didn't do it. The nuns did it. And then they became famous, and people came off all over the world and started interviewing them. And then it spread all over the place. And anyone who knows about this type of Pentecostal movement knows that Springfield, Missouri is considered the home of it, but they don't know exactly who brought it into the Catholic Church, and it was the Sisters of Mercy. So I also was involved in kind of what was called the Jesus Restoration Movement. Jesus coffee houses, right? And we started a press where I was a writer with some other people, and we write all this stuff and put it out in what we called the New Wine Press, which is really a kind of a Catholic joke, right? I mean, a Christian joke from the Bible. But then we started a group, and I played guitar and sang, and we started this New Wine. We just called ourselves New Wine. Opened a coffee house, and people just poured in. And literally, I saw so many miracles happening there from just young people. All of us were very young, and we didn't know what we were doing. We were just trying to believe what the Bible said literally, and literally tried to raise the dead, heal the sick, and do all this stuff. And literally, we saw miracles all the time. And Father William was so proud of me that I had branched out and not just stayed a Catholic, which is kind of the antithesis of what you would think would be coming from a Catholic priest.
Well, yeah, I mean, keep in mind the word Catholic means universal. And I mean, I remember a nun that I had when I was going through catechism. Catechism, for those of you that don't know, is really a kind of a rite of passage within Catholicism, and you're supposed to pick your name. You know, you have your birth name and you have your middle name and your last name, but you pick another name, and that name for your confirmation. Like last week, we discovered that Douglas is Peter, and I myself, I picked Matthew. And so that's all very interesting, but what does that mean? And it has to do with entering into a community of people that acknowledge and honor the mystery of Golgotha. Essentially, it's the incarnation of Christ into Earth evolution, looked at from spiritual science. But it's interesting telling all those stories about the charismatic movement and all that. I had a friend in high school, and his father was a minister out in Birmingham, and his dad, he liked his son to get a varied experience. So we travel around all over the city of Detroit and go to all these black gospel churches. We'd be like the only white guys there, and there'd be people just like in the movie, you know, they'd be on the floor just singing and wallowing around, and people would be up in praise, and it was really just a wonderful vibe. I mean, it isn't really my thing, but it was really nice being there, you know, that there's a certain transformative thing that's contagious when you celebrate the reality of the Spirit. And so it's essentially what these things were celebration of the Holy Spirit in the level at which these particular people could approach it, right? And so I'm not diminishing anything when I say that that's a particular path, and somebody may go through more on a level of the clarification and opening of the realm of feelings in a particular incarnation, whereas in another path they might have a more intellectual approach to it, while somebody else just goes out and works in the world and does things and contributes. So there's all these different facets that could be approached, and you shouldn't feel as if you're not doing your job if you're not doing all of them, like someone like Douglas here.
That's a fact. Don't do this at home. Don't try this at home, because it's not a happy story. And when I'm telling this story, as you can see, I'm not really laughing about it, because unfortunately this had to do with people's lives in a most profound way. And what you suggested a minute ago is so true. You can't exorcise anyone without the help of Christ, because Christ is the active spiritual being in the realm where these things are happening, not in the physical realm of the seen, but in the astral and the etheric realm of the unseen. And you can only do it with the help of Christ. You could, and the Holy Spirit and the Trinity and Mother Mary and every other saint that you can possibly call on, because these things are beyond terrifying. As a matter of fact, what happened in the end was he had started showing me all these films and video and these articles that were written about these exorcisms, people who were possessed, because he'd been doing it for a long time. Of course, it's hidden. And as Michael McKibben is out there researching, and he just discovered more stuff last night and sent it to me this morning, but essentially, he says, I can't find anything connected to Father Bresnahan that had to do with exorcism. And I just laughed. I said, are you kidding? Do you think at that time there were 3 exorcists in all of America? Do you think they gave their names out? No, no. Now they have empowered parish priests to do exorcisms on the whole congregation at once because there's so much evil in the world. But in those days, oh, no, 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 no. You couldn't talk about this. And there weren't horror movies, and there weren't people like the movie The Sixth Sense, that little boy that was clairvoyant who could see people who had died. Well, that's my life. Was that a happy movie? No. And was I a happy person? Well, if I wasn't being hounded by the, what would you call it? The darkness, and having to witness then the battles of the light fighting the darkness, then no, I wasn't so happy. I was happy in life with everything else. I was, as I say, I was in all the clubs. I was doing all this stuff. But the reality is that when I was about 15, about a year after I was with Father William, I started every night waking up, standing up in my bed with my arms stretched out like I was on a cross, and I was actually sweating and crazy and felt that as if I was witnessing the crucifixion, but I mean, like I was witnessing it, but experiencing it empathetically. So literally, I would wake up feeling as if I was being torn apart by light and dark in a battle for my soul. And that was not pleasant. As a matter of fact, I often would wake up my brothers by what it was I was saying, speaking, screaming, whatever. And that's the reason that they really at that point thought that I was completely nuts and started getting me, more help. And then of course, Father William just says, no, it's okay. This is all right. This is what happens. And like, no one told me this is what happens. You didn't mention this to me when you said, when my dad told me to go with you, you didn't say, oh yeah, by the way, you're going to believe that your soul is on fire. And so eventually, after that started happening, blood started to appear here, not on my palm, but here and here. And it would happen, maybe a couple times in the during the night. And so Father William had told my mother this, but and what to do about it. And then they sent me to psychiatrists, and they all thought I was a hopeless case. So I would have to have this wrapped up when I would go out in public. Same thing with my feet. And sometimes my head in certain places would have a drop of blood appear. And so I got a lot of bloody noses. So I could give myself a bloody nose. I just, say, oh no, I have a nosebleed if this would happen at school or whatever. Father William thought it was lovely. He thought it was beautiful. And he says, don't worry, this is going to go away. I'm like, okay, good. I sure hope it goes away, because do you understand what I'm going through at night? And he goes, no, this is part of the path. This is okay. And I'm like, okay, if you say so. And then sometimes I'd get this horrible pain in my left side as if something was stabbing my heart. No blood appeared there. And so this went on for, I don't know, 6 months, 8 months, something like that. And then it went away. Well, after that, then it really got bad. Okay. Then when I would leave the hospital to go to work, but particularly if I'd stayed there late and done the last office of the day with him, and I was walking home, I literally believed that horrible demons or a horrible demon was walking right behind me. And if I turned around and looked at it, I would die. Now that's crazy. Okay. At that point, I said, okay, up to this point, I can kind of deal with this stuff. It's nothing like I had ever heard of or anything like that. But this deal that if I turn around and I see this monster, I'm going to die, that's not good. So I told Father William about this, and he'd go, part of the gig. That's just part of the way that it goes. And you're going to eventually have to turn around and face that demon.
So I'm curious, because very recently, in the last couple of years, Pope Francis has changed the rite of exorcism, and he's changed some of the rules surrounding it. And I'm curious what your take is on that. To me, I didn't think it was a good thing at all.
There, just like the Jesuit oath, there's at least 3 forms of it. There's probably a dozen forms of the rite of exorcism. and it's often determined by who it is that's doing it, that which one you would use. There's there's sounds funny, but there's a short form, there's a medium form, there's a long form. There's a form that you would do if it goes on for days and days and days. There's parts that you can do when you're not in the blessed circle and you're preparing yourself. So there's all kinds of different aspects to this. Now, that he shortened it, that's because they started doing it in parishes, and they literally have now said any parish priest can do the short form exorcism. And what we told you the other day, that Ariel had the right given by Pope John Paul II, and I think that's probably what set him to this path, because she convinced him of all the evil out there, because she was constantly working on going to where it was dark and literally running light energy into this stuff. And so I believe she probably had something to do with that, because as far as I know, she was the only woman ever allowed to use the long form of the old long form of the rite of exorcism. So yes, there's different levels. They even now give you prayers that they hand out in the church to do one at home to try to remove the demons from you.
Yes, because I remember a report that came out some years ago, and they were having a conference up in, I believe it was in Norway, and about the increase in the need for exorcisms, and that they were going to dramatically try to come to terms with this new challenge, which, well, that's kind of disarming for most people to hear that kind of news. And by the way, like what Douglas is referring to, these are things that people have invited into their lives, by the way. So don't be in fear that you're going to get taken over. By the way, the armor of God is really one of the greatest and most powerful things that you can put your mind to, and use the breastplate of Christ that St. Peter, St. Patrick, excuse me, came up with. And that is Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ to my right, Christ to my left, Christ below me, Christ above me, Christ within me. And that the Christ being is infinitely more powerful than any of these adversarial spirits. So you just have to keep that in mind, because we're living in a world of fear at this time. And I think it's important for people to realize that they have that strength, that they are of that strength, that the part of you that's really here, the real part of you, is of that nature, being, and substance. And so to be able to bring warmth into your life, like what Douglas has been striving to do for his whole life, and also have I in my small way, I'm merely a jester in the court.
Well, the jesters get to speak the truth. I always wanted to be a jester. So yes, the Arbor of God is part of the old long version of exorcism, the exorcism rite, because you have to put it on once you get into the blessed circle, and then you have to bless yourselves in the 6 directions. And you, in the exorcism rite, it's actually calling on certain saints to protect different areas, very much like the Tibetan practices that do incredibly similar things, which I never came across until much later. But this deal was, when you go to face a demon, what are you going to do? Here's what he told me to do. And I couldn't do it for a while. And I thought I was going to have to leave him and leave that behind, because I wasn't brave enough to do what he said. This is what he said: turn around, look it in the face, realize that it's you, laugh at it, and give it a big hug. And I'm like, you can't do that. This demon is going to kill me if I even look at it. So how am I supposed to laugh and embrace it? Later, I find out in Tibetan Buddhism, when you're in the bardo, the realm beyond the threshold, when you see these monstrous, fierce beings, they are you. And you are supposed to embrace them. You're supposed to move through them, realizing it is you, embrace them and accept them. And so Father Williams would say, what, you think demons don't need love? You think they don't need to be blessed? And of course, it was through Christ. So I had trouble with that. Real trouble with that. As a matter of fact, it almost drove me away from working with him because it was terrifying. It was much more terrifying than these night terrors I had or the blood on different parts of my body, which of course they would call stigmata. And I said to him, "Why am I having this?" He says, "Because you're an empath. Did you not have this when you were young?" I went, "Well, I would, when I was in St. Joseph's Church, his old church that he was the pastor of, that was the holy sacred spot. And there were like 5 churches in Springfield. That was the one I always went to if I really needed guidance. And there were always angels in there. They still had the old altar in the old way. The priest still turned his back to the people. The whole thing was still filled with angels. So I could go there and it was tremendous solace. And as I said before, not only could you see angels there and other people witnessed angels there, and it was considered a very sacred, holy place, but outside, no matter what they would do, they'd put up a statue of Mary, um, and it would either cry or it would bleed or it would cry tears, or people would say that it spoke to them. And so literally hundreds of people would gather around there, and these phenomena would kept happening at St. Joseph's Church, where he was the pastor, and I was baptized and given to the church through him. So this church still to this day has kind of every time I go back, there's a haunted place I go to. I go to the chapel where Father William taught me, and I go to St. Joseph's. And it's kind of like facing evil, facing the angels, and then facing the fact that or I guess my path is to face this. And as I said before, you're not going to see demons unless you've seen angels, and you're not going to see angels unless you've seen demons. If you see one, expect to see the next one right away. So if you're going to face a demon, well, then you're going to see an angel on the other side. So eventually I learned that he wasn't kidding. I needed to turn, face my fear, let it go, embrace. It wasn't a demon. It wasn't the demons we were casting out. It was me. It was my own double. It was my own unresolved doppelganger. And when I realized that, I realized it had 3 different forms, and they were all 3 like dragon, ugly, horrible monster forms. And I realized slowly, one after the next, that if I embraced it and if I took it into my arms as if it were me, and I love it like an angel loves me, my guardian angel loves me, that I could get through it. So eventually I worked through those 3 levels and went and then stayed with him. But let's hear what you have to say, but then I want to talk about Grandpa Jennings.
Okay. Well, yeah, because that brings to mind, there's been a lot of talk over the last few years about, like with David Icke and all this thing about the dragon and all that. And many of the noble houses have dragons on them. And I don't know, last time I checked, I haven't seen any dragon skeletons in museums. They do have dinosaurs, but Rudolf Steiner is very clear. He says that with the guardian on the threshold, holding you back from the experience of the spiritual world and the world of soul, and which is a good thing, because if you're not ready for it, it's a very, very difficult experience. But were you to see what you look like in your astral form, you look like a dragon. You have the extended jaw and the receding forehead of animality with the extended jaw of egoism. And you can burst across the threshold and you look at other people and they can scare you. It's a difficult challenge. But you have to understand that Saint Michael, or Archangel Michael, the great archive being of our particular age, is holding back the dragon with the spear and sometimes with a sword. But he's not slaying it, he is holding it back. And that we don't want to totally disperse these things in a way to where they just go bother somebody else. We want to take up the task of being responsible for our own individual being, because we're created out of the divine substance through the agency of Christ, through the actions of the Elohim. And so we have a divine substance in us that is of something that's infinitely more powerful than the demons that are essentially the thoughts of higher beings. They're not even substance donated by higher beings, so that there's no reason to be afraid of them. And in fact, Rudolf Steiner says that the best thing you can do against Ahriman is laugh at him. He can't stand that.
Father William used to say that. He says, "If you can't laugh at a demon, don't be an exorcist." And that's a fact. But when you laugh at them, it's because you're mocking them and you're saying, "You have no power over me." And that is true. And if they attack you when you're doing an exorcism, if it's effective, it's because of your own lack of purity. It's because of your own doppelganger, your own immorality, your unresolved thinking, feeling, and willing. And so, because I was just a child and I really didn't have any experience in anything, I didn't have much to worry about. So I was able to pass through those three challenges: my negative thinking, feeling, and willing, which do turn out to be monsters. But now that was what happened with Father William. By the time I was 17, I think it was, he said, "Okay, so here's the deal. I'm going to have to take you to the Vatican to finish your training." And I said, "Vatican? You've been in the Vatican?" He goes, "Yes, I did my training at Saint Anselmo Benedictine University in the Vatican, and also that's where I was trained to be an exorcist." I'm going, "Oh, wow, what are you talking about?" He says, I've been writing reports on you since you've been with me, and because you have extraordinary ordination, they wish to have you there and see if you're really what I say you are." And I said, "Oh, okay, what does this mean?" He says, "We're going to go there and you're going to stay there." And I'm like, "Okay, all right, fine." I didn't think much about that because I was, like a senior in high school, and my number came up in the draft and I got drafted. And I said, "Well, I really don't want to stay with with John Gabriel, my assumed father." And I didn't really want to go to the Vatican. And I didn't want to leave my home, and I didn't want to do any of that. And I didn't want to take the scholarship I had from the Honor Society to Springfield to Southwest Missouri State University. Matter of fact, I had a few universities offer me full scholarship, but I didn't want to dodge the draft, and I didn't want to go dodge it in college. I didn't want to dodge it, so I decided I'll go into the military as a chaplain. So I looked into that, and they said, "No, no, no, you can't be a priest at age 18. There's no such thing. And no, we're not going to let you be a chaplain. That's just stupid." And so I tested, and then I tested high, and they invited me into the National Security Agency through the Army Security Agency. So I left home in a way to get away from the idea that I was going to go live in the Vatican for the rest of my life. I wasn't prepared for that. I wasn't prepared to be his protege when my father said, "Go with him, do what he says," which also meant I'll beat you if you don't. I loved my grandfather, Grandpa Jennings, full-blooded Cherokee Indian of the family of Chief Sequoyah. They were on the trail. His grandparents were on the Trail of Tears. And so I knew my great grandmother and grandfather, and they were both full blooded Cherokee, and she only spoke Cherokee. She didn't even speak English. Well, no one knew this. No one knew they were Indian. And no, 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 to this very day, they would deny it because uh, in those days, they literally killed Indians, and they killed the Indians who had interbred with their own cousins, which happened in my grandfather's family, to the point that they became albinos. So Grandpa Jennings was like 5'5", maybe, no hair, a tiny, tiny tuft of white hair, no beard, no hair on his body, pinkish kind of eyes. He was pretty much three-fourths albino, and he married a woman who was full-blooded Indian, but she wasn't Cherokee because of that, and they knew that. So he was cast out, and he was considered to be, kicked out. And he had a clairvoyance not dissimilar to Father Williams, but his clairvoyance was with nature, plants, animals, and things. So he built his own houses, every speck of them, every bit of it. He knew more about animals. He knew about every single plant or their healing powers. And he always had these funny names for them. He'd go, "Oh, that's called such and such." And then he'd say this weird word, and I didn't know what it was. It was Cherokee. And so he had like a complete clairvoyance of nature. And I loved him, and I spent more time with him than I spent with my father every time I had any time away from Father William, I'd go see Grandpa Jennings, and he basically initiated me into what you'd call herbology and animal husbandry, and the practical things of life. And he was a beekeeper, and I kept bees with him, and he wore the outfit because the bees would sting him. The bees wouldn't sting me, and he'd always say to me, "How do you do that? How do you get the bees not to sting you when they're when they're swarming? That's easy, but when you're smoking them and taking the supers, how do you get them not to bite you, to sting you?" He says, "I make them sting me right up front. I go to the hive," and he says, "I take a bee and I make it sting me, and then I take another and I make a couple of them sting me, and then they can smell it, and then they won't sting me." I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, I just tell them, I'm not afraid of you. You're the loveliest beings from the sun. You are higher divine beings and the queen. I love your queen." And so I love the hives and never got stung ever. So he taught me these ways of nature. Father William taught me the ways of basically theoretical religion and the training for basically to be an exorcist, not a parish priest, because he intended to take me to the Vatican and leave me there. And so eventually, when I got drafted, I did go in and I left. I came back to see him a couple times, and then he died 2 years after that. And certainly, I just pretty much put a lot of that behind me. But as you know, it continued to chase me for the rest of my life. And I'd be called into these situations against even not against my will, but certainly I didn't seek them out. People would just call and say, "Can you help us with this? Can you help us with that?" And by the way, I didn't charge any money for any of this until very, very, very late, when there were so many people wanting house clearings and so many people. So I, charge $100 to go clear somebody's house. Most of the time there was a ghost there, but they didn't know it. They just thought there was some weird energy. So but besides that, just like when you taught me cards, I did 10,000 free readings before I ever charged anybody for a reading, because I was trying to learn the system. So as far as I can tell, I'm still trying to learn the system of how it is that you extricate evil from embodying and ensconcing themselves in human beings, in places, in laws, like literally laws of our land. They literally become demon possessed. And the phantoms and the specters that are all around that people, have trouble handling. And so I've been called in to continue this work. And because, obviously I must have been chosen for some strange reason to do it, I only in the last 10 years since I've been with my beautiful wife, Tyler, that I've backed off of all of this stuff. And now it is her who got us to do this. So I can't be blamed for this. I'm just doing what Tyler told me to do. Okay. Which is tell my life for once, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, no matter how many skeletons are in the closet.
Well, that's wonderful. And so to the listeners and viewers out there, we're moving towards a different episode, shall we say, in Douglas's life. And so when he gets into his military career, perhaps we can chat about that in an episode coming up, because there's so much to cover. But I'm really enjoying this, and I'm sure that other people out there are enjoying it as I am. And it's important to understand, though, that you are who you are for a reason, and that if you could just consecrate yourself to service of Christ and act as if that was the case, then you're there, really, essentially. You just have to ask Christ to include you, because you're already included, but you just don't acknowledge it. And if you're embarrassed of Christ, he's embarrassed of you. So it's really, on a certain level, the easiest thing that you can do in life is to accept what you really are, and what is really the source of your true beingness, not the false shadow beingness that they're trying to enforce on us at this time. And so it's up to us to be able to turn the page of history. And so, Douglas, I want to thank you, and I want to thank your industrious wife, Tyla, who's a different kind of angel in and of herself. And so we're just out here trying to make a difference. And thank you so much.
Thank you, John.